Hello, and welcome to Enhancing Services to Preserve New Forms of Scholarship. I'm Jonathan Greenberg, Digital Scholarly Publishing Specialist at NYU Libraries. I'm here in the live meeting, the Library Publishing Forum, with Karen Hanson, Senior Research Developer at Portico. This is a project that we have been working on for the past 2 years at NYU Libraries, along with Portico and Clocks and a number of university presses, NYU Press, Stanford University Press, University of Michigan Press, UBC Press, and the University of Minnesota Press. So let me tell you a little bit about enhancing services to preserve new forms of scholarship. NYU Libraries has been working on this project over the past 2 years, along with a number of partner organizations, with the goal of improving services for preserving digital publications that have given particular trouble to preservation service providers and libraries alike. The project goals are twofold. First, given samples of the works that we're studying, preservation service providers will identify what aspects can be preserved and how scalable or resource intensive the services would be. And the second goal, which affects an even larger community of people, is based on the results of that work. We are creating guidelines and best practices that publishers and authors can use to improve the preservability of digital publications from the start. So what do we mean when we say new forms of scholarship? New forms of scholarship, in our case, are scholarship that pushes the boundaries of how scholars communicate and publishers publish. These works, which in our case are all book-like objects, book-like publications, but all digital, include dynamic features that cannot be represented in print, like embedded audio, video, high-resolution images, non-linear paths of engagement, digital data visualizations, interactive maps. Some have supporting software, code, or data, annotations and highlights, and non-traditional approaches to versioning, such as, draft versions that are presented along with the version of record, or even a case where there is no one version of record, but rather a set of versions. All of these are web publications and use flexible formats like EPUB 3 and HTML5. So just to give you a couple examples, many of the works that we looked at during this project were on the Manifold platform, which allows for really flexible introduction of resources both housed on the same server as Manifold, as the text of the publication, but also reaching out to other services or commercial services, other objects that are held elsewhere, and embedding them within the text or within the publication. Here's another example. We looked at a lot of works on the Scalar platform. Many of those were from Stanford University Press, but we also worked with the University of British Columbia. Here we can see a good example of a book that has a non-traditional path of engagement. Users can start here with the introduction, but they don't have to. They can look selectively at different aspects of this work. They can go straight to the archive, which in this case is an archive of press clippings from the 19th century, which is sort of the meat of this work. But this is not a work that goes front to back in the way that conventional books do. And so in order to preserve a book like this, we need to preserve not only the texts or the objects in this work, but also a way of navigating, a way of interacting with this book. So here's just how our workflow went for the course of our project. We selected publications that had a range of different formats and a range of levels of complexity. Preservation partners worked with publishers to define what was acceptable, and I'll get more into this in a minute. What needed to be preserved. The objects were then transferred to or collected by Clocks or Portico, and who then designed a workflow for preservation and came up with a sample or a mock-up of what it would look like and how it would act in the archived form if they ever needed to release that archived version in the future. Then we went back to the publisher, and the publisher evaluated, did this meet the criteria that we had set out in the first place? And this was all very, very carefully documented, and now we are in the process of creating guidelines that will be ready later this spring or early in the summer for publication, based on all of this iterative process that we went through many times over the course of 2 years. So I just wanted to say something quickly about the preservation criteria. This is a really important step, and you'll see it when we get into some of the guidelines at the end. Preservation services met with publishers and really asked together what was necessary for an archived copy of this work. I can't stress how important this is to think about this question from the beginning of a publication cycle. This is a collaborative process because it takes the right questions from the preservation service provider to really get to get the answers out of publishers who may not really have thought about this before. And then, of course, there was a transfer of information and files from the publisher to the preservation service. Here's an example of what we call an acceptance criteria document. This is the table of contents that we used for each publication that we looked at during the course of this project. Just going to go through the various methods of preservation that were employed by the preservation service providers. First was file transfer, when a publisher packaged up all of the files, all of the pieces and metadata associated with the publication and sent it to the preservation service provider. This is the standard procedure for Portico, and is often the only one necessary for Portico and for many other preservation services, libraries that do preservation. Web archiving, when a web harvester scrapes all of the content of a website in order for it to be replayed then in its archived form. For Clocks, this is their primary mode of preservation, of archiving material. And Portico, during this project, Portico did a lot of investigation for themselves onto how they could use web archiving to archive this type of scholarship. And finally, emulation, which is the sort of most cutting edge method, and we worked with the EASY project, which is centered at Yale University Libraries, to use emulation on some of the most complex works that we looked at. One of the biggest challenges we found throughout this project was that of remote resources. So in this case, you can see this is a publication on the OpenSquare platform from NYU Press. There are YouTube videos embedded into this book, and those YouTube videos are out of the control of the press and could not be sent to the preservation service provider. In addition, there were concerns on behalf of the preservation services that the press did not have the rights to harvest these videos from YouTube. All of which is to say, the presence of resources outside of the control of the publisher, whether they're audio, video, data visualizations, adds significant complexity to the process of preservation. And if that can be avoided, then that's really makes preservation much easier. And we recognize that it can't always be, but it's something really to think about from the beginning. Another challenge, many of the works had dynamic content. In this case, this is a book from University of Michigan Press that involves 3D archaeological models where a preservation copy needed to connect a text, which you see on the left side, with an interactive model on the right side. And you see those links in the text. Those link up to particular states of that model. This was also a particular challenge, and was something that that we were able to envision preserving. The question then becomes at what cost, how much effort is necessary. So finally, I wanted to give you just a little preview of our recommendations, which, as I said, are coming out sometime in the next few months. I think these will be, I hope that these will be really helpful for creators, for authors, for digital humanists, and publishers alike. And I hope that they'll be very useful to library publishers in particular. So here we go. These are just I think 7 of them that were sort of ready to be shared at a high level. So 1, define and document essential elements of the work that need to be preserved. This is what I sort of called attention to in the beginning. Really think about what's necessary. If selecting a new publication platform, assess platform options in light of preservation priorities. Okay, so really think about what platform you're using in light of preservation. Have a discussion as early as possible about video, audio, and other media assets that will be part of the publication. And when possible, avoid dependencies depending on externally hosted web services, and that's what I mentioned with the YouTube video. Publication export packages for preservation, which are really very, very useful, should have a simple package structure with consolidated structured metadata in a simple, intuitive file and folder structure. And create a meaningful caption for all non-text features embedded in a publication. This is something that many of us are already doing for digital accessibility purposes, but this is also very, very useful for preservation in the case that some feature becomes inaccessible in the future. A caption will mean that the user can understand what was there. For maps that pin a single location, we found this in a number of publications, replace dynamic mapping features with a still image of a map and link to the dynamic version. And include documentation for data visualization or software. Also include raw data when possible. I hope that you found this useful, and as I said, please look out for the publication of our formal recommendations sometime later this spring. Thank you.